It's the final week of 2023, and as you can imagine, everyone is doing their ends of the year list, and I'm not going to bother wasting any time here, as I'm pretty sure we're all adults and we know how end of the year lists work. Mine is just going to be a top 25. Other than that, what's going to be playing in the background, and I would consider this to be the best EP of the year, and definitely worth an honorable mention, is the latest Blood and Sun release, Orker, which technically this is an EP and a compilation, as side A is the new EP of all the new material, and side B is all previous tracks just re-recorded. But yeah, Blood and Sun has easily become one of my personal favorite neo-folk groups, because I feel like Luke and Company can do no wrong. Just really lush and engaging and honestly gorgeous sounding neo-folk. And yeah, once again, they just don't let me down, and as I stated, best EP I've heard of 2023 goes to this. Kicking this list off at number 25 is going to be Rajak, Phantasmagoria of Gilathan. So these guys are a two-piece Indonesian experimental group that I was quite a fan of with their previous album that came out a handful of years ago called Rampakin. And what they did on this particular album is it's a mixture of Afrobeat, hardstyle, noise, but the real standout feature is that they utilize a lot of shamanic, tribal ritual music blended all together that really kind of bleeds into their cultural sound with it. And what you get is a really hard-hitting, trippy, yet really creative album that I found myself listening to quite a bit when I discovered it. It was just such an oddball. Yet, with their latest album that came out this year, what they've technically done is they take that approach but expand upon it a lot more with just way more experimentation. As with Rampakin, a lot of the songs were roughly around like 3 to 5 minutes, and on this latest album, tracks on here range well past over 10 minutes. And what they're really bleeding in more of is the tribal, ritualistic ambience that really stretches out a lot of these songs. So while it may feel as if you have to get through a lot more material to get to like the hard-hitting Afrobeat and noise sections on the album, I just like the fact that they're expanding their sound and exploring new ideas. So while I still prefer Rampakin over this particular album, I'm just happy that they're still going and reaching out with other concepts for their style. So while it's going to be very different from everything else I will be talking about later on in this video, if you just want something different, creative, and off the beaten path for music anyway, that is still abrasive, it's still creative and engaging for what it is, definitely check out Rajak's material. Number 24 is going to be the collaboration between Genocide Organ and Prurient, titled Carte Blanche. All I gotta say, if you are a fan of death industrial, noise, and power electronics, this is a collaboration made in heaven for you, or in this case, hell, because good God, this album from start to finish is so punishing, as you would expect with really anything associated with Genocide Organ, with their sounds of death industrial that makes everything so mean, misanthropic, and unwelcoming as it can get for musical standards. It is just such a grim, bleak, and harsh sounding album. But when you have Prurient attached with this, with all of the ideas that Dominic Furnau does, who is the mastermind of Prurient, there's a lot more ambience in terms of the transition and overall textures on the album that makes it just a little bit easier to digest, but really that's not saying much, as again, it's a Genocide Organ album as well. So as I stated, it is so mean and bleak. But I guess with their audio samples and the overall pacing of the album that is really minimalistic, it just puts you in just such a grim, harsh, and just miserable sounding setting, I guess. And I think it's because of these really extreme negative emotions that it has with the overall tone of the album. I just admire how extreme they can make their, again, music. So again, just like the previous album I talked about, this is definitely not for everyone, but I feel like for individuals who like to test their overall endurance with what music can offer you in the sense of like power electronics, noise and death industrial, this might be up your alley, but again, it's for those who truly dare to test their endurance. Number 23, Thantafacthath with Hivemind Narcosis. So these guys are a black metal band based out of Canada, and I was a humongous fan of their previous album from 2014, Sacred White Noise, because it is such a powerful yet miserable sounding album. The best way I could describe it is think of the musicianship aspect of Deathspell Omega meets the attitude of Leviathan. Is a mixture of what this sounds like, and it is so freaking good. And here we are now 9 years later with their second full-length album, and I gotta say, I like it, but it's nowhere as good as Sacred White Noise. The biggest difference being that the overall vibe and attitude of Hivemind Narcosis is nowhere as emotive or miserable sounding. It's a lot more on this like occult vibe aspect. And the other big change that I noticed, at least musically, is that this album is way more technical with their overall guitar riffs, that it bleeds more into like the avant-garde black metal territory. That even though, again, I still immensely prefer Sacred White Noise, I would say for a 9-year gap in between for a follow-up, it's really solid. And if you're looking for more of the unorthodox and technical aspect in black metal, this will definitely appeal to you. Number 22, Diabolic Knight, Beneath the Crimson Prophecy. This is a one-man speed metal project from Germany that, just like with Thantafacthath, I was a humongous fan of, with the previous album, that being the debut, Beyond the Realm, that came out in 2019, and it was actually my album of the year for 2019, as it was a mixture, again, of speed metal, but there was also elements of black metal that it felt like, in terms of influences, which was really the big standout feature, it felt like you took influences from Merciful Fate, Niflheim, and Running Wild, blended all together, and it was just such a killer release. And with the follow-up here, I would say it still leans a lot on the speed metal aspect, and black metal is still there in terms of influence, only now it's replaced a lot more with traditional heavy metal. That, yeah, it still reminds me of Running Wild, and if you can remind me of Running Wild in any aspect, that's a humongous plus. But I still greatly prefer Beyond the Realm to this album, mainly because it just doesn't hit as hard. But again, if you're looking for just really aggressive, fast-paced, Teutonic speed metal that you would, again, get within the genre, Diabolic Knight once again fills the checklist of components that you would want. And overall, I would just say this is just a really solid follow-up from the previous album. Number 21, The Coffin Shakers, Graves Release Your Dead. These guys are a Swedish horror country rock band that got a lot of hype, considering the fact that this is their first full-length album in 16 years. That I would say overall it's really fun to listen to, as the vibe for it has like this spooky yet campy aesthetic attached with it. And even to an extent, during some of the songs on here, on the more upbeat and faster portions, there's almost like a punk rock kind of instrumentation going on that, again, just makes it all the more engaging, at least for me. That I would say overall, if you're looking for just a fun album to listen to, as the hooks, choruses, and instrumentation are really infectious, definitely check this out. Number 20, Rome, Gates of Europe. This is a neo-folk project mainly composed by Jerome Reuter that I've been a fan of for quite a while. And one thing that's always separated Rome from every other neo-folk project is that he's always given off like this larger-than-life sound that I would argue Rome should be characterized as like stadium neo-folk. And with this particular album, it's dedicated to Ukraine with their war against Russia. So there's a lot of themes here to do with pride and sacrifice. That the sentimental value towards Ukraine is really on the nose here. So I can respect the overall message on the album. However, my big criticism with it, and it's a huge reason as to why it's not higher up on the list, is while you can still characterize it as a neo-folk album, when you hear some of the choruses and songwriting throughout it, it leans more into like rock music, that at some parts it sounds more like this stadium rock anthem album with some of the choruses that, I don't know, kind of like deviates away from neo-folk. But regardless, the overall bulk in terms of the instrumentation on it is very neo-folk bass that I overall enjoyed it, and it definitely deserved a spot on this list. Number 19, The Gauntlet, Dark Steel and Fire. There's really not much to say with this album, as it's kind of like this mixture of speed and black metal with this strong emphasis on this rock and roll attitude. All 40 minutes of it are just going to bombard you with guitar riffs, solos, and just this face-melting energy that is just an ass-kicking album that I had loads of fun listening to. Number 18, Sufur, Nous sommes d'hier, which hopefully I said that somewhat correctly. This is a French one-man black metal project, and this is the 4th full-length album that it's put under. That, once again, it's just kind of like this mixture of like hyper-melodic black metal, heavily influenced by Dissection, but it's just faster and just more of everything. If you're looking for just really energetic, climactic, and powerful sounding black metal, once again, Sufur puts out some stellar material, and the drumming on this album in terms of the blast beats and fills are so humbling and just so well executed, how everything is performed so tight. Again, the French black metal scene with like their approach of like hyper melodic black metal have been killing it in this modern era, and Sufur is another great example of it. Number 17, Ozzy and the Jupiter, Cedar and Sage. Once again, another neo-folk band enters this end of the year list. And one thing that Ozzy and the Jupiter has always reminded me of, and this is I guess why they appeal to me, is their sound is really similar to that of Agaloc's The Mantle, only take away all of the metal aspects on The Mantle and it primarily focuses on the folk and neo-folk aspects. And with this album, they continue that approach once again. The only difference is I've noticed is there's a lot more ambience and atmosphere attached with it, that it becomes a really comforting sounding neo-folk band that, I don't know, whenever I need like background music in my own personal time and leisure, I found myself listening to this album quite a bit. And again, for anyone who wants to get into neo-folk, especially some of the newer bands popping through, at least in the 21st century, definitely check out Ozzy and the Jupiter. Number 16, Health, Rat Wars. These guys are kind of like this electronic rock band that often experiments a lot with industrial music. However, with Rat Wars, a lot of people have noticed that this is one of their heaviest albums to date, mainly because they're influenced a lot by metal music now on this particular album. And while I wouldn't personally call it a metal album, the influence of it is very present, especially on the guitar riffs that makes everything heavier. But the standout feature about it is because of this influence, it's made all the electronic portions a lot more dense, abrasive, and more hard-hitting, that it just cuts a lot deeper. Yet it just made everything all the more memorable and fun for me, honestly. That the best way I could summarize this album is it sounds like it's an EDM album for metal fans. Number 15, LCN, with their self-titled full length. These guys are a two-piece experimental trip-hop group based out of Canada that I've been waiting years for them to do a follow-up. And the reason for the big delay is all the complications they had to go through with COVID, their producer passing away, and them having to relocate to a new studio. It's been hell for them to release this album, but I commend them for just sticking with it and finally putting this album out. And again, it's their approach of experimental trip hop that's just really lush and just engulfs the listener in like this very comforting, soothing sound that you're just going to feel weightless listening to it. But the standout feature that's always sold me about LCN is the vocalist Elsiana. Her voice is unlike anything else I've ever heard, that it just sounds otherworldly and just makes the trip hop portions all the more lush. Seriously, the vocal performance by an LCN album will sell you on it alone. God forbid you can never find anyone that sounds like her. It's truly a one-of-a-kind voice. And I'm just overall happy to see LCN continue on and make new music, and they did not disappoint with this latest offering. Number 14, Dodheimsgard, Black Medium Current. These guys have transitioned so much throughout the years, as originally they had Fenris from Darkthrone on vocals and bass, and their approach was a very stripped down, straightforward black metal approach. Yet throughout the years they have been experimenting so much with avant-garde, industrial, psychedelic rock, and space rock. And with this latest offering right here, I feel like the reason as to why so many people have been praising it and hyping it up is it's not so much the black metal and extreme metal portions that make it a standout, but all of the experimental parts of space rock and psychedelic rock that make it quite unique and feel like this great odyssey to be taken to listen to everything. That really all of the extreme metal and black metal portions are doing. You're kind of feeling like a bridge to connect the psychedelic and space rock portions. That really, for me at least, if you're going to listen to this album, you have to listen to it from beginning to end, almost like it's mandatory to really appreciate all the experimentation and ambition Dode Heimsgard has with it. That it's just a really wacky, wild, experimental black metal album that showcases there's still a lot of weird and wild ideas to do in extreme metal, and Dode Heimsgard keeps black metal fresh and creative. I feel like that overall, yeah, if you want experimental black metal and arguably one of the best albums in the experimental black metal scene, you gotta listen to this latest offering by Dode Heimsgard. Number 13, Blazin' Right, Wild Rites and Ancient Songs. If you're looking for a traditional heavy metal album that just checks off everything you would want with its components of infectious songwriting, killer choruses, great guitar riffs, that takes influences from bands of the past like Heavy Load and Manila Road and just plays off of those influences towards their strengths to just create some really killer music, definitely check this band out. Because when I heard the second song on the album, Salvage What You Can of the Night, I was hooked on it from beginning to end. Seriously, the songwriting and just choruses will just get drilled into your head. It's just a really anthemic heavy metal album that a lot of people have been hyping this album up throughout the year, and it's for all the right reasons. Again, I feel like for anyone who enjoys traditional heavy metal, you need to listen to this. Number 12, Kenit, To Be Cruel. These guys are a New York-based drone doom metal band, and this is their first album in 14 years. And for me, this is quite the standout for my own personal taste, considering the fact that I really do not care that much for drone doom metal, and it's rare that I even talk about doom metal that much on my channel. But Kane is a whole different beast that I was not prepared for, as I know I'm really late to the game getting into them, as I just really discovered them earlier this year thanks to you guys, and they have stuck with me from the first note that I heard from them. As you would expect for drone doom metal, it's very, very slow paced, but just everything about it is just so derailing, from the vocal performance that just feels like this tormented, miserable human being is just trying to lash out every little bit of energy that he can of just hate towards the world. The guitar riffs, percussions, and all the instrumentation that feels like just a ton of bricks is falling on you whenever they execute any instrumentation, to just the hazy drone that's kind of layered throughout it to create this very unsettling ambience throughout it. It's just a really suffocating, nauseating album that, just like what I talked about with Genocide Organ and Perurian collaboration album, it feels like this is an album that's meant to just test your endurance and towards what you can really handle in music. That I know we don't always look for like this kind of like endurance test with music. We just want to enjoy it and listen to an album from start to finish. But if you're looking for more of like that endurance of an experience on an album, anything by Kane will definitely test it. But even still to this day, with their comeback album and being absent for 14 years, they still managed to create this just very unsettling, unforgiving, soul derailing album. Number 11, Blutswar, Those of My Blood. Prideful, strong, militant black metal with a strong influence of oi punk scattered throughout it. The guitar riffs on here have a lot of power, but it's also really melodic at the same time. The vocal performance has that prideful and powerful sound. Just overall, it's a really powerful and prideful black metal album from start to finish that really has no filler with it. And I feel like for anyone who's looking for more of like that punk influence, black metal approach, this is definitely one of the big standouts of this year. Number 10, Gridlink, Coronet Juniper. The technical grindcore band Gridlink comes back, which will apparently be their last album. And once again, it's business as usual with Gridlink, as it's this really like spiraling out of control take on grindcore that has a lot of technicality with it. That's very mathcore and math rock inspired. And again, just like most Gridlink albums, it's roughly around the range of like, what, 20 or so minutes I think this album is. A lot of the songs on here range from like 40 seconds to a minute and a half at most. They're not really doing anything different here, but there's really no other sound quite like Gridlink's approach on technical grindcore, and that's what I admire so much about it. And if this really is their last full-length album as they hyped up on social media, then they went out with a bang. Number 9, Cruel Force, Dawn of the Axe. German black thrash titans Cruel Force finally return after like what, over a decade of absence from their previous album, and they unleash arguably like the metal album to listen to of this year, because the instrumentation on here does not let up. It's just this ferocious blend of black thrash, guitar solos in every song, vocals that are super energetic that just shout out all the choruses with just such high velocity and energy, pummeling drums, face-melting guitar riffs. As I stated, it is like the metal album to listen to of 2023, and it's just such a fucking blast to listen to as well. Number 8, Raspberry Bulbs, The World is Empty, The Heart is Full. So this has been a band that I've always kind of like pushed off to the sides, but recently, and this year, I finally decided to listen to them in full along with their other albums. And I gotta say, this is some really killer like noise rock, death rock, punk, I guess. I know it's often labeled as like this blackened punk band, but with this particular album, they're leaning a lot more on noise rock and like death rock kind of influences on here. And I don't know, just the savage nature of everything on the album, from the production value, the vocals especially, and the guitar riffs that again have like a strong noise rock punk sound to it. It just makes for like a really vicious album that if you're just looking for gritty, ugly, aggressive music, Raspberry Bulbs absolutely killed it on this particular album. Number 7, Kenit Her, The Nature Out There. Easily for me, folk album of the year, as they're a really prolific neo-folk band that experiments quite a lot. And with this particular album, I've noticed they're going for more of the, I would say, down-to-earth approach with neo-folk, with a lot of stringed instruments when it comes to the violin and cellos. And the vocal approaches on here are very mixed, with all different vocalists adding their own different pitches and making everything really come off very diverse in nature. That there's some upbeat songs, some really ambient, slow-paced songs on here. So it feels kind of like this melting pot of ideas in neo-folk that still feels cohesive and really engaging. And overall for me, as I stated, it is the folk album for me of 2023. Number 6, House of Harm, Playground. These guys are from my neck of the woods in Massachusetts, and often are characterized as a post-punk band that takes heavy influence from The Cure. And I've been waiting quite a hot minute for them to do a follow-up to their debut full-length album, Vicious Pastimes. And overall with Playground, what I've noticed is they carry over that influence of post-punk onto this latest full-length offering, only there's a lot more influence now of synth pop scattered throughout it. That for me personally, from what I hear on each song, as anthemic and infectious as they are, it feels like a mixture in terms of influence from like The Cure meets Depeche Mode, which are two great bands, Depeche Mode being a humongous plus considering the fact that it's one of my all-time favorite bands. So I can't really say for certain right now if I like this more or less than Vicious Pastimes, but overall it's a stellar follow-up from Vicious Pastimes, and I think a must-listen for anyone who enjoys post-punk music. Number 5, the latest full-length album by Akitsa, you best believe when this was released, I obsessed over this because I've been a fan of Akitsa for years now, and they're really one of the black metal bands that really got me invested in the style of music, mainly because of just how simplistic and straightforward their approach is with raw black metal. At times it does have influence of punk music, bits and pieces here and there when you listen to particular songs. But again, it's just that straightforward approach that just makes it so easy to follow along with. And what makes it stand out is the vocalist done by OT. His pitch and his range. He can do the wretched, raspy, high wailing screams, but also like the really, throaty, grainy grunts. That just gives a little bit of diversity. But again, if I'm looking for just savage, ugly, hideous black metal, Akitsa can do no wrong. And once again on this album, they follow that simplistic formula to a T, and I loved every minute of this album. If you're just looking for simplistic, grainy, raw black metal that takes no thrills and just gives you just that and only that, Akitsa is a must-know. Number 4, VV, Neon Noir. Ville Valo finally returns with new music. And even though this isn't him, his Infernal Majesty, this is still really substantial for me, mainly because I've been a fan of him since I was in middle school. So this feels like a big nostalgia trip. Even though it doesn't carry the hard rock and heavy metal sound that we kind of know him for, it still carries over some of the goth rock and more mellow aspects of him. Think of some of the songs from Dark Light or Deep Shadows with Brilliant Highlights. That mellow approach is carried over here. And he takes a lot more influence, not so much with metal music, but more of 70s rock pop like Mama and Papa's. And even to an extent it reminds me a little bit of really early Depeche Mode material is kind of carried over on here. And even though, as I said, it's more mellow, you still get that signature vocal performance by Ville Valo that I've always been a fan of, and again, it just carries over here. It just feels like a big nostalgia trip while still being fresh and new. And I was just obsessing over this album when it came out, I think all the way back in January. And here we are now at the end of the year, and I'm still obsessing over it. And just overall, if this is the last thing Ville Valo ever does, if him ever does a reunion show or he continues on, I'm just overall happy that this happened. There's finally something new with some essence of him still being carried over all of these years later. And as much as I sound like this biased fanboy for him and Ville Valo's music, just overall it was just highly enjoyable, and I'm just overall really happy that this album happened. Number 3, Torture Chain, The Reign of Demos. Hands down for me, black metal album of 2023. Which is also the biggest surprise as well, because I really wasn't expecting much from this album, as Torture Chain has always been a band that sticks with its playbook, as it's just this blast fest of a black metal band. Just loads of blast beats, loads of tremolo pick guitars, that is just speed, velocity, all the time, every time, with anything you listen to by Torture Chain. And to be honest, with this latest full-length album, that playbook really hasn't changed all that much. There's just tons of blast beats, tons of tremolo pick guitars. It's very fast played throughout this album as well. The big difference, however, is the usage of keyboards on the album add in highlights, ambience, and just this other layer of chaos scattered throughout the album. But the songwriting and overall execution of everything just being so chaotic and hectic just makes it feel like it's just this whirlwind of chaos happening non-stop. And with the vocals just screaming throughout everything, I don't know why, I just ended up having so much fun listening to the album, even though the components and dynamics for it are really straightforward for most black metal albums. I don't know, I just always found myself returning to it again and again and again, that it's just this fun, chaotic, barbaric black metal release. And I feel like that's all I need to state here, because there's not much else to state with the album overall. But yeah, for me personally, this is black metal album of 2023. Number 2, Melocarpan Vertumnus Caesar. Easily for me, metal album of the year goes to them. Because I've always viewed it that Melocarpan is a great band, but with this latest full-length offering, they become one of the elites. Taking obvious influence from bands like Merciful Fate, King Diamond, and Master's Hammer. But what's made them now like their own unique entity in metal is they bleed forth more of like their Slovakian culture into their music, and it's truly something one of a kind. And with this latest full-length offering, they just nailed it on the head, because the guitar riffs, as generic of a metal fan as I sound saying this, are so awesome. The compositions on this feel like thought out and intelligent, but at the same time they're just fun. Like, there's a lot of this like ass-kicking yet magical vibe to this album that only Melocarpan at this point can really truly do well, I feel like. That, yeah, it's a mixture of like traditional heavy metal with the guitar riffs and overall instrumentation, and some kind of influence of like at least first wave black metal, but it's really only the vocals that I hear are like black metal influenced at all. So really, to me, by each album, Melocarpan in terms of instrumentation is leaning more into the traditional heavy metal influence, and god damn, if they keep doing it, or at least keep following this pattern, I don't see as to how they could ever release anything under great, because everything has just been stellar in their discography, and this is another phenomenal addition that I feel like for every metal fan that comes across this album, regardless of what your favorite subgenre is in metal, needs to listen to this as soon as possible. Number 1, album of the year for me will go to Lathe of Heaven, Bound by Naked Skies. This is an album that I randomly gave a chance a handful of months ago off of a whim, and I'm so glad that I did, because I've been listening to it non-stop since then. In terms of genres you're going to hear, it's a mixture of like post-punk, death rock, goth rock, to a certain extent, that takes influence from bands like Christian Death, Sisters of Mercy, and Fields of Nephilim to an extent. And it's just so well played, everything. There's a lot of diversity in terms of the overall pacing on this album. There's slower portions, there's faster portions, more mid-paced, more moody, more aggressive. And what makes it flow so evenly and cohesively is the vocalist. His range has so much diversity and versatility to it that he can hit the notes on everything being played so well, and hits the notes on all the different subgenres perfectly, I feel like. The guitar riffs on here are super infectious, a lot of melody to it, but also has a bit of kick when it needs to. The drumming on this album too is really well, as it's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of, versatility in terms of the fills and overall beats, that nothing feels lackluster. It really feels very thought out, and it's just engaging and so creative. God, just everything about this album, all the different little details of it, I could just ramble on forever really about just complimenting every little aspect of it. Just overall, if you are a fan of post-punk, goth rock, or any of the subgenres or bands that I talked about that take influence towards this album, listen to it, because I cannot say enough positive things about it. And if they make anything, as this is only their debut, and I can only imagine what they got planned in stores if they continue on, if they make anything even just half as good as this, I will pick it up and buy it immediately, because this album is just that damn good. And that'll do it for this video, guys. Like always, everything will be linked down below in the description of what I talked about in this video. And yeah, that'll do it for it. So like always, guys, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.